This one's from Concerned. Bill, how does one handle a situation where a subordinate has a strong personality and sometimes acts as though she is your superior dictating issues that need to be addressed? This person also has been known to say, "That isn't my job. This person is of minority." And it almost appears as though the boss is timid to approach she or he, possibly due to the person viewing it as discrimination because of the personality.
Interestingly enough, these are the kinds of issues that we're hearing more and more and more about. And I'm going to go back to what I've said in an earlier session. Who's in charge? When someone says, "That's not my job," or someone tells you what you ought to be doing, you've got a fundamental problem. And the problem you've got is that you as a manager have allowed something like this to get out of control. Now, how do you make sure that it doesn't get out of control? Things like documentation when it does, so that what you've got a case that says, look, more and more this is happening, John or Mary or Susan. You need to clarify the expectations pretty clearly in terms of what that person's job really is. One of the other things I think to do is to communicate to this person how disruptive they are to the entire sales team. No matter what anyone says or does, they really like to be part of something positive, something meaningful, something like an entire team effort. I think one of the other things is that you've got to be able to have consistent and regular performance reviews. Now, quite frankly, if you're doing a performance review with someone and the information you give them is a surprise to them, that's your fault. It's management's fault. I'm going to suggest to you that more and more I'm seeing the importance of having strong leadership and management in place. So it's expectations, it's documentations, it's performance review, it's an honest evaluation of where someone is, and then allowing someone to realize how critical they are to the entire team. In the final analysis, as something like this continues, you've got a problem that's going to fester and fester and fester and get worse. My recommendation is deal with it sooner rather than later.
Okay, this question is from David. Bill, I work in the financial service industry and have service levels and expertise second to none. My industry is very competitive and heavily reliant on relationships. The problem I have is threefold. 1. When approaching prospects, they consider my service offerings to be overstated, as is the norm in my industry, and almost always genuinely have an existing relationship with another service provider. How can I convince them to experience a difference when many simply close the door with the excuse that they are already well serviced?
Already well serviced is a very interesting term. What does already well serviced mean? It's kind of like you don't know how good something is going to be until you experience it. You don't realize how sick you were until you're well again. I think the real issue here is that you've got to find a way to have some objective third-party social proof criteria that you can utilize at the very front of your positioning so that you get a lot more pull than you have to be able to go and push. People like to do business with experts. They like to do business with people who are well respected. I'm going to suggest that you need to position yourself in a marketplace that's a little bit different from all the other people in your industry. Now, when you do that if you do things quicker, faster, easier, you're more organized, you give them better reports, and this is what so-and-so and so-and-so have to say about you, you're going to be in a pretty good position. One of the things you also need to do is to get testimonial evidence from current clients or past clients about how well you actually service them, how well you actually do that, and I think that'll make a big difference for you.
2. In some cases, these prospects are already competing in my market as a way of supplementing their cash flow, with lawyers and accountants offering financial products. In most cases, they are not very good. How can I break into their business and demonstrate value-added advantages for them if they forego part of their supplementary income?
I think that's a pretty simple answer. It's called revenue share. Now, revenue share doesn't necessarily have to mean dollars. It can mean additional referrals to them from some of your other clients. It could be co-branding of a product or service. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think if people quite often think about what something could be rather than what it's not or is not going to be, they're better off. It's basically a concept of prosperity thinking, prosperity concept versus poverty thinking. What can be versus what can't be. So I think you need to split the pie and share the wealth and let you do what you do well, let them do what they do well, and then the client for each of you will be very well served in the end.
And 3, when some prospects have tried my services, they are extremely satisfied but either pass my service model on to their existing service provider or adopt it themselves. How can I prevent or minimize this? Many thanks.
One of the things that's interesting about this is you say you let your clients try your product or service. You see, when they try your product or service, you very well could have someone who's out there fishing for more intellectual capital or intellectual property. One of the things you may want to do is to have them not try it, but have them buy it. That makes a big difference. You also may want to have them sign some form of confidentiality agreement, because now what happens is that heightens what you've got, and they can only utilize it for their own internal reasons. Now, it may take a little bit of guts to do that, but if you're well positioned in the marketplace and what you have is proprietary or appears to be proprietary, is very different, you're going to find yourself in pretty good shape.
And finally, the last question for this week comes from David Yates. Bill, the prospect is a chemical company. I am one of 3 competitors going after an expansion. Both competitors have been in the account before I started calling here, and both have equipment in the plant. There are 3 contacts. 2 are internal advocates and 1 decision maker. 1 advocate is on my side. 1 advocate is with a competitor. The decision maker works at another location, several states away, and will not take my calls. I've been told that he only reviews the quotes and discusses the options with the advocates and will not discuss anything with the vendors. I believe the competitor's advocate has more sway, and his position is based on preferring the technology my competitor offers. Do I continue creating trust and value with my competitor's advocate, continue to try to contact the decision maker, or take another path?
Probably your greatest opportunity at this point is to try to get some sort of influence with the other advocate. Clearly, the other advocate is not your advocate. They're someone else's advocate. But what you may want to do is to get your internal advocate to set up some sort of a meeting between that person, yourself, and that other advocate. If you can swing that person over in your direction, preponderance of the evidence is going to be very strong. Now you've got 2 internal advocates in your stead. That may be difficult to do. The thing you don't want to do is to try to circumvent these people and get to the decision maker, because if you do that, there's a good chance you're going to alienate both of them, your internal advocate, unless of course they're with you when you make the presentation, and the other internal advocate. Now this is going to be very difficult for you to do, simply because, in the first place, because this person won't even accept your phone calls. It seems to me as if you've got an arm's length relationship with this person who's the decision maker. You've got a problem because the other people's equipment is already in the plant. You're going to have to be more guerrilla. You're going to have to get more involved in it. What you may want to do is to get into the plant yourself and find out what in fact is not good with the other equipment. What can you do better? Develop more in-depth internal advocacy from people who are operators or production people, people who use the equipment, and start to develop some sort of a groundswell. Now, to do that, you need to be able to get in there, have your advocate help you do that, and then I've asked them questions like this. What are you looking for that you haven't found? What are some problems you'd like to solve? What are some difficulties that consistently come up with this equipment? What would you like to see resolved? What could be done better? And now you develop this preponderance of evidence. Not only do you have your advocate, you've got other advocates. So now you're going to try to work on the other advocates, get your advocate to get the other advocate on your side. And in the absence of that, I think you're kind of stuck. But I'm going to recommend those 3 or 4 strategies, and I think they might work.
Thanks for doing this again, Bill.
Thank you, Andy.